Hey guys, how you doing? It's Tom. This is The Truth About Gun Control. All references made as part of this presentation can be found in the reference links below. After every mass shooting in America, we hear the politicians, the mainstream media, go on television and call for further gun control. Some even call for the outright repeal of the Second Amendment and the confiscation of all guns in the United States of America. So I wanted to take some time, because this is a very important topic, to bring some clarity to the gun control debate and provide some historical perspective as to the importance of the Second Amendment. Because those of us who don't understand history are doomed to repeat it. So when you talk about guns in America, you'll generally hear two different statistics. And this is why defining our terms is so important, no matter what the topic. You'll hear gun deaths. Gun deaths refers to any time any person in America dies at the hands of a gun. This includes suicide. So when people use this statistic, or when writers use this statistic, they're often trying to make the gun situation in America appear to be worse than it is. Because over 2/3 of gun deaths in America are actually suicide. And suicide isn't exactly a reason to call for gun control. It's sad. Maybe it might be preventable with some better mental health counseling. But if someone wants to kill themselves, they're going to do it. Whether that by gun, via knife, slitting their wrist, whatever it may be. The second statistic you'll hear, or the second term you'll hear used, is homicides. This is the statistic that matters. In 2016, there were 11,000 homicides in America. Homicide meaning a person being shot by a gun held by someone else. And you will get roughly 11,000 homicides a year in America, give or take, possibly a little bit more, possibly a little bit less, but the number is pretty much stagnant around that 11,000. In 2016, 1 of every 5 homicides in America took place in only 25 cities. And this included cities like Chicago. In fact, it was dominated by cities with strict gun control laws, such as Chicago, Detroit, and Baltimore. To put that into perspective, 11,000 homicides in America, and most of that's related to gang violence, drug smuggling, that type of thing. So to put that into perspective, in 2015, there were 52,404 lethal drug overdoses in the United States of America. 20,101 of those drug overdoses were from legal prescription opioids. I don't hear a lot of talk from the mainstream media and the politicians about the effect prescription opioids have on America, or mass shootings for that matter. They receive a lot of money from the big pharmaceutical companies. In 2015, 22,990 people died deaths from heroin overdoses alone. Just like the war on drugs has failed to stop people from doing heroin, failed to stop people from doing cocaine, whatever illegal drug it might be, a war on guns, or the prohibition of guns, is very unlikely to stop criminals from getting guns, because the very nature of being a criminal means you're willing to break the law. In 2016, 40,000 people died in car crashes in the United States of America. Keep in mind, homicides is only 11,000. In 2015, 5,376 pedestrians were killed when walking on the sidewalk or crossing the street, and 818 people were killed by cars when riding bicycles. I don't hear a lot of calls from the mainstream media about banning cars in America, but driving, or even riding a bicycle, is just as or more dangerous than guns in the United States of America. 630,000 Americans die from heart disease each year, and there's a heart attack every 40 seconds in the United States of America. 1,604 people were killed via knife attack in 2016. 903 people were killed with other weapons. 656 people were beat to death with the hands and feet of other people. 472 people were killed with blunt objects such as hammers. 98 people were strangled to death. 11 people were poisoned to death. And 9 people were deliberately drowned. There are many different ways to kill people, and when people want to murder someone else, they generally will find a way to do it. Now, the reason we hear calls for gun control is whenever there's a mass shooting, it's very frightening, right? Just the prospect of that your child could be at school, or you could be at a restaurant, or a movie theater, or a concert in Las Vegas, and some random nut could get a gun and open fire is terrifying. And so often we allow fear to rule us, right? Think about the Patriot Act. We gave away a great deal of our privacy and our liberty after 9/11 because the government used the fear of that attack to get us to give away our liberty. But how dangerous are mass shootings in reality? You know the whole saying, struck by lightning. Well, in 2017, there were 112 people killed via mass shootings and 531 people wounded. So of most of the homicides in America, right, if there's 11,000, a very small percentage of that is happening from mass shootings. In 2016, 71 people were killed via mass shooting. 83 were wounded. In 2015, 46 people were killed via mass shooting. 43 were wounded. In 2014, 17 people were killed via mass shooting and 28 were wounded. 2013, 31 people were killed via mass shooting and 13 were wounded. In 2012, 67 people were killed via mass shooting, 68 wounded. In 2011, 18 people were killed via mass shootings and 21 were wounded. 2010, 8 killed, 2 wounded. 2009, 38 killed, 37 wounded. 2008, 16 killed, 24 wounded. 2007, 51 killed, 32 wounded. So keeping that in the bigger picture of roughly 11,000 people killed from homicide, usually for gang violence and drug war type stuff, very few people, a very small percentage of people are killed via mass shootings in America. Now, when you hear the staunchest supporters of the Second Amendment, the number one thing they'll cite is the danger of government. So let's try to put that into a little bit of historical perspective. Demicide is defined as the murder of any person or people by a government, including genocide, politicide, or mass murder. Genocide targeting a race, politicide targeting people for political reasons. Between the year 1900 and 1999, so this is very recent history in terms of world history, 262 million citizens around the world were murdered by their own government. So this isn't war. This is a government killing its own people for reasons of genocide, politicide, or mass murder. Breaking it down to some of the greatest offenders, the Soviet Union between 1917 and 1987 killed 61 million of its own people, and the numbers I'm going to give you are low estimates. So on a low estimate, the Soviet Union between 1917 and 1987 killed 61 million of its own people. China between 1923 and 1987, in a low estimate, killed 48 million of its own people. Germany between 1933 and 1945 killed 20 million of its own people. The Holocaust. Japan between 1936 and 1945 killed 6 million of its own people. Can you imagine the government rounding up and killing 6 million people? Cambodia between 1975 and 1979 killed 2 million of its own people. The Turkish government between 1909 and 1918 killed 2 million of its own people. The government of Vietnam between 1945 and 1987 killed 1.6 million of its own people. The government of Poland between 1945 and 1948 killed 1.5 million of its own people. The government of Pakistan between 1958 and 1987 killed 1.5 million of its own people. So let's go back to the mass shootings. I'm just going to read by year from 2007 to 2017 the number of people killed. 2007, 51 people killed. 2008, 16 people killed. 2009, 38 people killed. 2010, 8 people killed. 2011, 18 people killed. 2012, 67 people killed. 2013, 31 people. 2014, 17 people. 2015, 46 people. 2016, 71 people. 2017, 112 people, plus about 11,000 people killed in America annually from homicide. Compare that to Demicide, the Soviet Union, 61 million people. China, 48 million people. Germany, 20 million people. Japan, 6 million people. Cambodia, 2 million people. Turkey, 2 million people. Vietnam, 1.6 million people. Poland, 1.5 million people. Pakistan, 1.5 million people. What a tremendous difference. Where does the real danger lie? If you take out the emotions. And if we look at governments today, in the present day, in North Korea, there is an estimated 80,000 to 130,000 people who are currently in what is called secret prison camps. They're concentration camps. The government denies they exist, but intelligence agencies all over the world have undeniable proof that they do exist. Defectors have provided first-hand accounts of what goes on at these concentration camps. And this includes prison guards that have escaped North Korea. They describe systematic murder, infanticide, torture, persecution of Christians, rape, forced abortions, starvation, and overwork leading to countless deaths. Thomas Bergenthal, forgive me on the pronunciation, was an Auschwitz survivor, that's the concentration camp, death camp in Nazi Germany, who served under the International Court of Justice, which is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. He said that, and I quote, "I believe that the conditions in the North Korean prison camps are as terrible or even worse than those I saw and experienced in my youth in the Nazi camps and in my long professional career in the human rights field." So an Auschwitz survivor is reporting that the concentration camps in modern North Korea are worse than the death camps in Nazi Germany. It is estimated that Kim Jong-un's predecessors, that's the dictator of communist North Korea, killed over 1.6 million North Koreans starting in just 1948 to the present day, and we don't know just how many people are murdered by the government of North Korea annually, because obviously the government doesn't want those statistics to get out. Just like on the low estimates that I read to you of democide in the 19th century, those governments didn't want those numbers to get out. So we can only imagine what the real number is if 262 million people is a low estimate. And this is very, very, very recent history. If we look at South Africa today, which is considered more of a first world country, the current government of South Africa, the African National Congress, is currently calling for land confiscation and redistribution without compensation of all white-owned farmland. They are using the majority of people in South Africa, who are black people, to use their democracy to change the laws to what they claim to be legally confiscate all white-owned farmland. Can you imagine your land being taken away based on your skin color by your government? The Economic Freedom Fighters, which is the third largest party in South Africa, openly calls for the murder of South African farmers. And the citizens of South Africa have taken on that call. And the South African farmers are being murdered in pretty large numbers. And I actually just did a report on this titled, "South African Farm Murders a warning for America, and I will provide the link to this below. I strongly recommend you watch it to understand just how dangerous government can be. Now let's look at American history. We have the Trail of Tears, where the American government removed, at point of gun, using the United States military, removed hundreds of Native Americans from their land and marched them across the country, where hundreds and hundreds of them died. We have the Wounded Knee Massacre, where the American government sanctioned the American military, at point of gun, to remove hundreds of Native Americans from their land in South Dakota. When there was a little bit of resistance from the Native Americans who didn't have enough firepower, hundreds of Native Americans in South Dakota, including women and children, were executed by the United States military, the United States government. Slavery. You know, you get a lot of the narrative that the white man did slavery. Well, what happened is the white man used government authority and a monopoly over the use of force, a monopoly over the government's use of guns, to enslave African Americans who didn't have guns to fight back. The Jim Crow laws were mandated government segregation, and again, African Americans just didn't have the firepower to fight back. During World War II, the American government rounded up and put countless numbers of Japanese Americans into what they called internment camps, but they were really concentration camps. And many of these Japanese Americans had their entire lives destroyed, so even when they got out, they lost their property. Now let's look at the American history of war. We have the USS Maine, where the present-day American government now admits that the American government lied about what happened on the USS Maine, where they claim that the USS Maine was blown up, where it may have actually been accidentally blown up by the American government. We'll use that term accidentally loosely. That false flag event was used to launch the Spanish-American War. We have the sinking of the Lusitania. The American government was using the British ship, the Lusitania, a passenger ship, to smuggle weapons to the British government. Germany told America, they told the American government, that if you continue to use the Lusitania to smuggle weapons to Britain, Germany would have no choice but to shoot down the Lusitania. The American government didn't warn the American public. Germany shot down the Lusitania, and then the American government used the outrage of American citizens being murdered by Germany for no reason, of course there was a reason, to justify America getting into World War I. And this was after Woodrow Wilson ran on a platform that he would keep America out of World War I. We have the Gulf of Tonkin, where it is now admitted that the American government lied that an American warship was fired upon in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. That lie was used to justify escalation into the Vietnam War. We have declassified documentation of Operation Northwood. Operation Northwood was a proposal by the United States deep state to crash American commercial airliners into buildings, kill American citizens, blame it on the Cuban government to launch a war against Cuba. Where have we seen a plan like that executed in American history? I'll let you use your imagination. In the early 1990s, the American government, with the help of the American mainstream media, of course, made up a lie that Iraqis were throwing babies out of incubators and murdering newborn infants. And they used that lie with children. Where have we seen children used as propaganda? But they used that lie to justify America's entrance into the Gulf War. And then, of course, we have 9/11. No matter what you believe happened on 9/11, we have the 28 pages which clearly states that Saudi Arabia was the biggest perpetrator in the events of 9/11, that Iraq had little to nothing to do with the events, but the American government, with the help of the mainstream media, was able to garner public outrage and get America to launch an invasion into Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11. Of all the events I just described to you, how many 18-year-old Americans, which is the age that Americans are sent to war, how many 18-year-old Americans were killed based on these government lies? How many foreign wars have been started under false pretense? And how many children, how many women and children, civilians in Iraq and other countries have been killed by the American government based on lies? Do you really think the American government and the mainstream media, which helped them perpetrate these lies, is that concerned about high school students potentially being shot in school shootings? Or are they using that as propaganda to take away our basic liberties? Did you know that to this very day, America is assisting Saudi Arabia in attacking the people of Yemen? And good thing for the people of Yemen, they have the second highest gun ownership in the world, and they are using it right now because they are being slaughtered by the government of Saudi Arabia with the assistance of the American government. And this is something we all have to realize, because the government is using these mass shootings, using fear, just like they did with 9/11 and the Patriot Act, just like they're doing now with the mass shootings, which is a very small percentage of the actual homicide deaths which take place in America. The government is using this fear to call for gun confiscation. But understand, there is no such thing as gun control. There is only gun centralization. Because in order to have gun control, the government or the police, which if you're in the African American community, right, they've been very dissatisfied with policing in America, yet you want the police to have all the guns. So if you want gun control or gun confiscation, you need the police, which are government, to use their guns to take away the guns of the American civilian population. After those guns are taken from the civilian population, the American government doesn't get rid of their guns. They keep their guns. So there hasn't been gun control, there's only gun centralization. Centralization to government, which has proven, as we've demonstrated already in this presentation, to be the most corrupt, power-hungry, mass murderous institution in the history of man. Why on earth would we allow the government to be the only ones who have guns? Now let's take a look at current day America, because we have two narratives in America at this present time. And no matter what narrative you subscribe to, right, people are stuck in the Republican-Democrat paradigm, but whatever narrative you subscribe to, either way, the American government is completely corrupt. It's corrupt to its core. So narrative one is that President Trump is compromised, that he is completely controlled by Vladimir Putin, and he is a puppet of Russia, which means the American government, our democracy, has been taken over by Russia. Narrative two is that the whole Russia situation is made up, it's a lie, and it is actually an attempted soft coup by the deep state, the Clintons, the FBI, the CIA, to overthrow a democratically elected American president. Either way, whichever narrative you subscribe to, the American government is completely corrupt and completely compromised. Now that we have established that the government is compromised, how can we possibly justify allowing the government to take away our gun rights or take away our guns altogether? I think it's pretty clear that we have established that the right to bear arms, the Second Amendment, is crucial to the freedom and the liberty of the American people. So now let's take a look at what regulations might or might not be appropriate. So when we talk about gun regulation, a lot of people talk about England, because England has the lowest rate of gun-related homicides in the world. Roughly 50 to 60 people die from gun homicides each year. Members of the public may own sporting rifles and shotguns subject to licensing, but handguns are essentially banned. It's very difficult to get a handgun in England. So with all that, you say, okay, well, this is great, right? They ban the guns, and the crime rate is down. Again, we're not even considering the chance that the government might eventually start massacring its own people, which historically, in recent history, is an inevitability. But, okay, we'll say this is good. There's tough gun laws, and gun homicides are down. But you have to look a little bit deeper. In 2015, there was a 6% rise in violent crime in England. In 2016, there was an 8% rise in violent crime in England. And in 2017, there was a 14% in violent crime increase in England. Gun crime, in spite of the tough laws, has actually been up 20%. Knife crime has been up 21%. There has been a 32% rise in domestic burglary, so you're not even safe in your home because burglars know that you don't have a gun to protect yourself. There's been a 29% rise in robbery, again because robbers know you can't protect yourself. A 36% rise in stalking, because if a woman doesn't have a gun, she's very vulnerable. An 18% rise in vehicle-related crimes, and overall violent crime in Britain is way up. What about mass murders? In March of 2017, 6 people were killed and 49 people were injured in a vehicle and knife attack in Britain. In May of 2017, 23 people were killed and 400 were injured when bombs went off at an Ariana Grande concert. And in June 2017, 8 people were killed and 48 people were injured in a vehicle and knife attack on London Bridge. Mass murders still take place in England, and crime is actually on the rise because criminals know that good law-abiding citizens are not able to defend themselves. Let's take a look at France. To own a gun in France, you need a hunting or a sporting license and to pass psychological tests. Owning a handgun or semi-automatic rifle is possible, but requires extensive background checks and monitoring. In 2016, 86 people were killed and 434 were injured when a truck ran people over celebrating Bastille Day in France. So in spite of these tough laws, there's still mass murders in France. In 2015, 130 people were killed and 368 wounded when bombs went off at a football match and shooters trapped and shot civilians at an Eagles of Death metal concert in a coordinated attack by ISIS. In 2015, 12 people were killed and 11 were injured in what is called the Charlie Hebdo massacre, where Charlie Hebdo's magazine was targeted because they had published pictures of Muhammad. So we now see in England and France, in spite of their tough gun laws, there are still mass murders. Let's take a look at Mexico. Mexico has fairly strict gun laws. All guns must be registered through the federal government. Carrying a gun requires a license. Sales are legally limited to one store in Mexico City, and carrying license can be taken away by the government at any time. In spite of that, 2017 was the worst year for homicide in Mexico since the government began keeping track in the 1990s. Authorities opened 29,168 murder cases in 2017. The Mexican murder rate is 22 per 100,000 people compared to 5.3 per 100,000 people in the United States of America. The problem is that criminals don't follow the law. So if you stop law-abiding citizens from buying guns, criminals are still going to buy guns. Many people who call for tighter gun control use Australia as a model that America should follow. In 1996 and 1997, the government landed a buyback of all semi-automatic and automatic rifles. So basically, people were forced to give their guns to the government, their automatic, semi-automatic rifles, and the government gave them money in return. Like in England, because this is predictable, the armed robbery rate soared immediately after the buyback. As a result, after 1997, gun ownership in Australia actually grew 3 times faster than the population. So people didn't have the automatic weapons anymore, but gun ownership went way up. And Australia actually has less restrictive gun laws than in France, where mass shootings are known to take place. So people will say, oh, well, crime has gone down in Australia. Yes, that's true, but the population is actually more armed, not less armed. What about Germany? In Germany, gun laws are extremely restrictive. Carrying permits are only issued to people with particular needs. So you really have to demonstrate to the government that there's danger to yourself in order to get a carry license. As it relates to murder, manslaughter, rape, and sexual assault, there has actually been great increases in that type of crime in Germany. In 2015, there was a 12.8% increase. In 2016, there was a 14.3% increase in this type of violent crime. Most of these crimes were committed by refugees. According to federal criminal police data, in 2013, migrants committed 599 sex crimes. In 2014, migrants committed 949 sex crimes. In 2015, migrants committed 1,638 sex crimes. And in 2016, migrants committed 2,790 sex crimes. Gun rights are women's rights. How could you possibly claim to be a feminist or to be for women's rights, but you advocate for women not to be able to protect themselves? The reason women are in danger when they're with men is because men are more physically able than women. So men have the ability to physically dominate women. If you look at domestic violence statistics, women are just as violent as men. It doesn't really matter because men can protect themselves. But when men get violent against women, it's catastrophic because they don't have the ability to protect themselves. But a woman who can carry a gun is just as strong as a man. Just ask my wife, because if I were to ever start to hit my wife, I could guarantee you'd see it on the news, because she would put a bullet between my eyes, because she's a strong woman. And I'm very proud of her for that. Now let's take a look at Israel. Soldiers can carry their weapons on or off duty, but civilians must pass 3 background checks, establish a genuine reason for possessing a gun, and pass a weapons training course. So if you're in the military, it's very easy to carry. It doesn't matter if you're on duty, active or not. But if you're a civilian, you need to go through great lengths to get a gun. So there's been great chatter around social media as to some people claim that teachers in Israel are able to carry guns. This is actually not the case. And people were saying that because school shootings are very rare in Israel. What does take place is there's only one entrance into every school in Israel, and every entrance is guarded by a fully armed active military personnel. So that's great, right? That's very positive results. So in Israel, the schools are guarded by military personnel, and there's not school shootings. Okay, that's a solution. But the problem is the people are completely subservient to the state. So if the state of Israel ever decides to turn on the people, which again, we've shown is the greatest danger we have to worry about, the people really wouldn't be able to fight back. And again, we know this. You say, okay, well, the soldiers are armed. The soldiers won't just turn on the people of Israel. This is not the case, and we know this because we saw this in the Soviet Union. We saw this in Nazi Germany. And we actually have scientific data to back it up. So if you do your research, you look up something called the Milgram experiment. And what the Milgram experiment did was it took a group of people, sat them down with a scientist, and had them push a button. And they were told that when they pushed the button, they were essentially electrocuting someone on the other side of a wall. And they would be told to push the button, they push the button, and they hear some screaming. And the scientist would tell them to push the button again, they push it again, and the screaming would get progressively worse. To the point where the people on the other side of the wall were begging them, please stop pushing the button, please stop, oh my God, please help me, I'm going to die, please stop, I don't consent to this is against my free will. But the scientist would tell them, no, this is part of the experiment, you keep pushing the button. And sure enough, almost everyone involved continued to push the button because people are trained to outsource their thinking to authority. And this is exactly what we saw in Nazi Germany. This was also replicated by something called the Stanford Prison Experiment. A professor in Stanford took a group of students. He made one of them the prisoners and one of them the prison guards, and he pretty much left them to their own devices. And within 1 week, the experiment had to get called off because the prison guards had become so physically and verbally abusive that the people doing the experiment actually had to worry about legal liability. So people are trained to outsource their thinking to authority, and we all think we're so different. Oh, this would never happen. What happened in Nazi Germany would never happen in America. But the historical data as well as the scientific data actually suggests that we are much more like the people of Nazi Germany than a lot of people would like to acknowledge. So a better solution for America would be to increase individual liberty, not restrict it. Instead of not allowing the citizens to carry guns and putting military personnel at the entrance of every school, a better solution would be to just increase our liberty, allow teachers to carry guns. And people say, oh, well, what would a handgun do against an automatic weapon, a semi-automatic weapon? Well, imagine you're a teacher. You're in the classroom with your student. All you have to do is sit in your classroom and point your gun directly at the entrance, the door to the room, and if anyone tries to enter the room, you shoot them. And just like that, you could protect your students until police arrive or whoever it may be, and you are much safer. We are protected from school shooters, and Americans continue to have their liberty. And in fact, this principle works outside of schools, right? Wherever it might be, people who are sober, not drunk, not high on marijuana, not high on drugs, because they're not impaired, if they're able to carry guns wherever a mass shooting may take place, people are able to fire back. They not only protect themselves, but they protect everyone involved. And even if they can't take down the shooter right away, they at least make the shooter take cover and buy enough time where the police could arrive, and you save countless lives. You don't have to worry about these mass shooting deaths, and we keep our liberty, which protects us against the ultimate threat, which is the government killing Americans, which again, we have demonstrated will happen based on historical data, as well as just things the American government have done, from Jim Crow to slavery to Japanese internment camps to lying to get America into flags via false flag wars. And let me just ask you this question in terms of school shooting and mass, because lately, everyone's outraged about the Parkland school shooting. Which school would you feel safer sending your child to? A school that has a sign that says, this is a gun-free zone, or a school that has a sign that says, teachers on premises are armed and are authorized to use deadly force to protect the students? Come on, of course the school with the teachers being armed is safer. And if it's not, why do the politicians send their children to school with armed guards? Because if they're not going to allow us, the citizens of the United States of America, who they allegedly get their power through, right? They get their power through the consent of the governed. If they're not going to allow us to use guns to protect our children at school, then why should we allow them to use guns to protect their children at school? It's a double standard if you ask me. The last country I want to look at is Switzerland. Switzerland has some of the least restrictive gun laws in the world. Service rifles are stored in the private homes of soldiers. the law allows for the purchase of semi-automatic firearms by citizens. So if you're a citizen, you can get a semi-automatic weapon. Switzerland has the third highest gun ownership rate in the entire world. Yet there has only been 120 gun homicides in the last 10 years. I will repeat that. You could own semi-automatic weapons. They have the third highest gun ownership rate in the world, and there has been only 120 gun homicides in Switzerland over the last 10 years. There hasn't been a mass shooting in Switzerland since 2001. This suggests that America has a mental health problem. We have a cultural problem, not a gun problem. Why can Switzerland have guns and not have all of these homicides, all of this gang violence, not have all of these mass shootings, but America can't? Well, we'll look into that another day, but it does suggest the problem isn't the guns itself. It also suggests that increased firearms doesn't mean more homicides. It can actually mean just the opposite. The success of Israel and Switzerland seem to suggest that an armed American population is a safer population both from the threat of government and the threat of mass shooters, including school shooters. Disarmed populations have also proven to be at greater risks for violent attack on a day-to-day basis. Because if you don't have a gun, criminals know that. So they're more likely to break into your house. They're more likely to rob your convenience store. They're more likely to attempt to rape you if you're a woman. If the American government were to tell Germany that they were to disarm or be met with the full force of the American military, the mere threat would be considered an act of war. This is no different when it comes to the American citizenry. Any attempt at mass confiscation of weapons under the threat of imprisonment or death is a declaration of war by the American government against the people of the United States of America. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me, I do accept subscriptions at www.patreon.com for as little as $1 monthly. I'm also on Steemit. I write a blog there, which I would really appreciate if you followed me. I'm TomFFRnews on Twitter. I post on FFRnews on Facebook, although not that much because the algorithms are so suffocating. I'm Tom Anderson on Facebook, Tom Anderson on Gab. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you share this message. It's very important. Gun rights are American rights, and I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much.